The promise Hunter Nash made to Victoria Vale stood between them like a canyon too wide to cross. And on the day they married in the dusty church of Terlingua, Texas, he wondered if he would spend the rest of his life staring across that impossible distance. The year was 1878, and the small mining town nestled in the Chihuahuan desert had seen its share of unusual arrangements, but few as peculiar as the marriage between a hardened cattle rancher and a schoolteacher who barely knew each other's names before the preacher bound them together with words neither truly believed. Hunter had been 28 when his father died, leaving behind a ranch that sprawled across 3,000 acres of unforgiving Texas scrubland, and a will with stipulations that made his teeth grind every time he thought about them. The old man had been specific in death, as he had been in life. The Nash ranch would pass to Hunter only if he married within 6 months of his father's passing, the old patriarch believing that no man could properly run such an operation without a wife to settle him. It was an outdated notion, born from another era, but the law recognized such testaments, and Hunter found himself trapped between losing everything his family had built over 2 generations or finding a woman willing to share his name if nothing else. Victoria Vale had arrived in Terlingua 3 years prior with nothing but 2 trunks of books and a teaching certificate from a school back east. At 24, she had already survived more than most women twice her age. The consumption that took her mother had left her father a hollow shell of a man, drinking himself into an early grave within a year of his wife's death. Victoria had used what little inheritance remained to flee the memories of Philadelphia and start fresh where the air was dry and supposedly healthy, where the past could not follow her through letters and pitying glances from neighbors who remembered her as the daughter of the drunk who died face down in an alley. She had built a life in Terlingua that was modest but her own. The schoolhouse where she taught 15 children of various ages sat on the edge of town, a simple structure that baked in summer and froze in winter, but it was hers to command. She had her books, her students, and her independence. She had sworn never to marry, never to place herself under the control of a man who could dictate her existence, who could take away everything she had worked to build. Then the bank notice came. The property where her small cottage sat, which she had been renting from old Mr. Henderson for 3 years, was being sold. Henderson's son back in San Antonio had convinced him to liquidate his Terlingua holdings, and the new owner wanted to tear down the cottage to expand the general store. Victoria had 60 days to find new accommodations, and in a town where decent housing was scarce and a single woman's options were limited, those 60 days felt like 60 seconds. She had been sitting in the Terlingua restaurant, picking at a plate of beans she could barely afford when Hunter Nash walked in. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone in town knew the Nash family, knew about the sprawling ranch north of town where they rang cattle and horses, knew about the old man who had built an empire from nothing but grit and meanness. She had heard that Thomas Nash had died, had seen the funeral procession through town, but she had never spoken more than a passing greeting to his son. Hunter had removed his hat when he entered, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, longer than was fashionable but practical for a man who spent more time with cattle than people. His face was weathered from the sun, lines creasing around his eyes that spoke of squinting across vast distances. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard rather than those who lifted weights for sport. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sage after a rain. He had walked directly to her table, and she remembered thinking how strange it was that he moved with purpose, as if he had come looking specifically for her. Later, she would learn that he had. The restaurant owner, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman whose husband had worked the cinnabar mines until they killed him with mercury poisoning, had suggested Victoria when Hunter had mentioned his predicament. A respectable woman, Mrs. Chen had said, educated, of good character, and in need of security. The practical nature of the match had appealed to them both, even as it had repelled them. "Miss Vale," Hunter had said, his voice deeper than she expected, roughened by dust and disuse. "I wonder if I might speak with you about a business proposition." That was how it had begun. Not with romance or even attraction, but with a business proposition delivered over cooling beans in a restaurant that smelled of chilies and desperation. Hunter had been direct. He needed a wife to satisfy his father's will. She needed security and a home. He proposed a marriage in name only, a legal arrangement that would benefit them both. She would have the protection of his name, a home at the ranch, and complete freedom to continue teaching if she wished. He asked nothing of her except her presence and her signature on a marriage certificate. Victoria had wanted to refuse on principle. Everything in her rebelled against the idea of becoming any man's property, even in name only. But practicality was a harsh teacher, and she had learned its lessons well. The alternative was leaving Terlingua, abandoning the life she had built, the children she taught, the first place that had felt like home since her mother died. She had negotiated like she was trading horses, demanding assurances, insisting on separate bedrooms, on her continued independence, on the right to leave if the arrangement became untenable. Hunter had agreed to everything. He had been almost eager in his agreement, as if her demands reassured him that she understood this was business, nothing more. They had shaken hands across the table like business partners, and Mrs. Chen had brought them coffee to seal the deal, her wise eyes seeing more than either of them wanted to acknowledge. The wedding had been swift and joyless. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, had seemed uncomfortable with the entire affair, sensing something hollow in the vows they spoke. Hunter's ranch hands had attended, 4 weather-beaten men who worked the Nash spread and looked at their boss with expressions mixing sympathy and confusion. Mrs. Chen had come, along with a few of Victoria's colleagues from town. The children she taught had not been invited. How could she explain to them that their teacher was marrying a stranger for reasons that had nothing to do with love? Victoria had worn a simple dress of dove gray, refusing the mockery of white. Hunter had worn his best suit, black and severe, looking more like he was attending a funeral than a wedding. Perhaps in a way they both were. They were burying the future they had imagined for themselves, the one where they controlled their own destinies, and replacing it with this strange compromise. The kiss that sealed their vows had been brief, perfunctory, his lips barely brushing hers before he pulled away as if burned. She had tasted dust on his mouth and something else, something that might have been regret or relief. Her hands had trembled when she signed the marriage certificate, the pen nearly slipping from her fingers. Victoria Nash, she had written, and the name had looked foreign, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Hunter had driven her to the ranch in a wagon loaded with her belongings, the 2 trunks of books that had traveled with her from Philadelphia, the few pieces of furniture she owned, her clothes and personal items. They had barely spoken during the journey, the silence stretching between them like the desert itself, vast and unbreachable. She had watched the landscape change as they traveled north from town, the scrubland giving way to areas where water ran closer to the surface, where grass grew in patches and trees provided occasional shade. The Nash ranch house had surprised her. She had expected something rough, a bachelor's domain of dirt and disorder. Instead, she found a solid structure of stone and wood, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The house had been built to last, to withstand the harsh desert climate, with thick walls that kept the interior cool even in the blazing heat of summer. Inside, she discovered rooms that were sparse but clean, furniture that was practical rather than decorative, and everywhere the sense of a woman's absence. Hunter's mother had died when he was 12. He told her as he showed her through the house, and his father had never remarried, never saw the point of softening the place with feminine touches. "This will be your room," Hunter had said, opening a door on the second floor to reveal a spacious bedroom with windows facing east. The morning sun would wake her here, she realized. The room held a large bed with an iron frame, a wardrobe, a dresser, and a washstand. Simple, clean, functional. "Mine is down the hall. You will not be disturbed." The way he said it, so carefully formal, had made something in her chest tighten. This was her life now, she had thought. Separate rooms, separate lives, bound together by law and necessity but by nothing else. She should have been relieved. This was what she had negotiated for, what she had demanded. Instead, she felt hollow, as if she had traded one form of loneliness for another. The first weeks of their marriage established the pattern that would define them. Hunter rose before dawn and often did not return to the house until after dark. He worked the ranch with his men, riding the fence lines, managing the cattle, breaking horses, doing the endless labor that kept 3,000 acres productive. Victoria rose early as well, making breakfast that Hunter barely touched before disappearing into his work. She would clean the house, tend the small garden behind the kitchen that had gone wild during the months after Thomas Nash's death, and then ride into Terlingua to teach her classes. Hunter had given her a mare, a gentle sorrel named Rosie, so she would not be dependent on him for transportation. The gesture had surprised her, had seemed almost thoughtful until she realized it was simply practical. He did not want to be responsible for her comings and goings, did not want the obligation of ensuring she could reach town. The horse was freedom, but it was also distance, another way of maintaining the space between them. They ate dinner together, one of the few times each day when they occupied the same space. Victoria cooked simple meals, nothing fancy, drawing on skills her mother had taught her and recipes she learned from Mrs. Chen. Hunter ate without comment, neither praising nor criticizing, methodically working through whatever she placed before him. They made small talk about neutral topics. The weather, which was always a concern for ranchers. The state of the cattle market. News from town. They were polite strangers sharing a house, nothing more. At night, Victoria would lie in her bed and listen to the sounds of the house settling, the wind moving through the desert, and sometimes, through the walls, the sound of Hunter moving in his own room. She wondered what he thought about in the darkness, whether he regretted the bargain they had made, whether he felt the same strange ache she did, this sense of living only half a life. Hunter wondered the same things. He would lie in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman sleeping down the hall. His wife legally, but a stranger in every way that mattered. He had thought this arrangement would be simple, that they would coexist without complication, 2 people sharing space and nothing else. Instead, he found himself acutely aware of her presence in his house, in his life. The way she hummed softly while cooking, old melodies he did not recognize. The scent of her soap, something floral that lingered in the hallway after she passed. The sight of her reading in the evening, curled in the chair by the window, completely absorbed in her books. She was beautiful, he had noticed on their wedding day but tried not to acknowledge. Not in the flashy way of saloon girls or the delicate way of society women. Victoria had a strength to her beauty, something in the set of her jaw and the directness of her gaze. Her hair was dark, nearly black, and she wore it pinned up during the day, though he had seen it loose once, early one morning when he had come downstairs before she expected him. It had fallen to her waist in thick waves, and he had retreated quickly, feeling like he had intruded on something private. Her eyes were an unusual shade of violet blue, dramatic against her fair skin. She had a scatter of freckles across her nose that she tried to hide with powder, not realizing they were charming rather than a flaw. Her mouth was expressive, curving into smiles when she talked about her students or frowning in concentration when she read. He found himself watching her mouth more than was appropriate, wondering what it would feel like to kiss her properly, not the brief touch of their wedding but something real. He crushed those thoughts whenever they arose. They had an agreement. She had been clear about what she wanted from this marriage, and it was not him. She wanted security, independence, freedom from being alone in a world that did not treat single women kindly. He could give her those things. He would not complicate matters by developing feelings that had no place in their arrangement. Summer deepened into the brutal heat of July and August. The desert baked, temperatures climbing past 100 degrees by midday. The cattle suffered, gathering in what shade they could find. Water sources became critical, and Hunter spent long days ensuring his stock could reach what springs and wells dotted the property. Victoria continued teaching, though the schoolhouse became an oven despite her best efforts to keep it cool. Several of the families with ranches farther from town kept their children home during the worst of the heat, leaving her with only the town children. But she persisted, believing education too important to abandon for comfort. Hunter noticed she returned from town each day more exhausted, her face flushed with heat, and he began to worry. He told himself it was practical concern. If she became ill, it would complicate their arrangement. But the truth, which he barely admitted to himself, was that he had begun to care about her welfare beyond mere practicality. One evening in late August, she returned from town looking particularly drained. She had dismounted from Rosie and nearly stumbled, catching herself against the horse. Hunter had been working with one of the hands near the barn and saw her. He crossed the distance between them quickly, reaching out to steady her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands on her arms, feeling how thin she seemed beneath her dress. "Just tired," Victoria said, though her face was pale beneath the sunburn. "It was very hot today." "You should not be riding in this heat," Hunter said, hearing the sharpness in his voice and not entirely able to control it. "You could have heat stroke." "I have a responsibility to my students," Victoria replied, pulling away from his touch, standing straighter despite her obvious exhaustion. "I cannot simply stop teaching because it is warm." "Warm?" Hunter shook his head. "It was 108 degrees today according to the thermometer in town. That is not warm. That is dangerous." "I am perfectly capable of assessing my own limits," Victoria said, her violet eyes flashing with irritation. "I do not need you to manage my decisions." "I am not trying to manage you," Hunter said, frustration rising. "I am trying to keep you from killing yourself out of stubbornness." "My stubbornness is none of your concern," Victoria shot back. "We have an arrangement, Mr. Nash, and nowhere in that arrangement did I agree to be treated like a child who needs supervision." "Mr. Nash," Hunter repeated, something in his chest tightening at the formality. They had been married for 3 months, and she still called him Mr. Nash. "We are married, Victoria. You could at least use my given name." "Why?" Victoria asked, and there was something raw in her voice now, something beneath the anger. "We are not really married. We are two people who signed a paper and share a house. That is all." She had turned and walked toward the house before he could respond, leaving him standing in the dusty yard with words he could not quite form stuck in his throat. That night, They did not eat dinner together. Victoria claimed a headache and stayed in her room, and Hunter sat alone at the table, pushing food around his plate and feeling the weight of her words. That is all. Was that really all they were? September brought some relief from the heat, temperatures dropping into the 90s, which felt almost cool by comparison. The pattern of their days continued unchanged, polite distance maintained, words carefully neutral. But something had shifted slightly after their argument, a crack in the careful wall they had built between them. Hunter found himself looking for ways to make things easier for her. Small gestures, he told himself, were only practical. He repaired the shutters on the schoolhouse windows so they would open and close properly, giving her better ventilation. He spoke to Mrs. Chen about sending lunch to the schoolhouse on the hottest days, so Victoria would not have to worry about preparing food. He made sure Rosie was always well-groomed and ready to ride, the saddle cleaned and oiled. Victoria noticed, though she said nothing. She told herself his actions meant nothing, that he was simply maintaining his investment in their arrangement. A sick or exhausted wife would not serve his purposes. But late at night, in the honesty of darkness, she admitted to herself that she appreciated the gestures more than she wanted to. She appreciated him more than she wanted to. She had begun to notice things about Hunter that she had deliberately ignored before. The way he was patient with the horses, especially the young ones, gentle in his breaking methods where other ranchers used violence. The way he treated his ranch hands with respect, paying them fairly and ensuring they had decent food and accommodations. The way he read in the evenings, slowly working through books he borrowed from her collection, asking her questions about things he did not understand, genuinely interested in learning. He was not what she had expected when she had agreed to marry him. She had assumed he would be like her father, using alcohol and anger to fill the empty spaces in his life. Or like other men she had known, treating women as property to be managed. Hunter was neither of those things. He was quiet, thoughtful, and unexpectedly kind in ways that made her defenses feel less necessary and more like prison walls. October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the beginning of what passed for autumn in the desert. The light changed, becoming clearer, the shadows longer. It was Victoria's favorite time of year, and she found herself smiling more, relaxing slightly in the more comfortable weather. Hunter noticed the change in her and found himself responding to it, their dinner conversations lasting longer, touching on topics beyond the merely practical. She told him about her students, about Tommy Rodriguez, who struggled with reading but had a gift for mathematics, about Sarah Chen, who wanted to be a doctor like the father she had never known, about the Miller twins who could not be told apart, except that Jacob wrote with his left hand. She talked about her love of teaching, about the moment when a concept clicked for a student and their face would light up with understanding. Hunter listened, genuinely interested, asking questions that showed he was paying attention. He told her about the ranch, about the satisfaction of seeing cattle thrive on land that seemed too harsh to support life, about the horses he bred, mixing wild Mustang stock with domestic breeds to create animals that were tough and smart. He talked about his father carefully, the complicated relationship between a hard man and a son who was never quite what that man wanted. He talked about his mother, dead these 16 years, whose absence still shaped the empty spaces of his life. What was she like? Victoria asked one evening as they lingered over coffee after dinner. The question was more personal than they usually allowed, but something in the evening, in the way the lamplight softened the harsh lines of the house, made such questions possible. Hunter was quiet for a moment, considering. "Strong," he finally said. "She had to be to survive out here. She came from Tennessee with my father, left everything she knew to live in this desert, but she never complained. She made this house a home, grew flowers where nothing should grow, sang while she worked. She taught me to read before there was a school anywhere near here, used to order books from catalogs, and we would read together in the evenings. You must miss her terribly, Victoria said softly. Every day, Hunter admitted. My father, I miss the idea of him more than the reality. But my mother, yes. I wonder sometimes what she would think of the life I am living, the choices I have made. Victoria understood he was talking about their marriage, this arrangement born of necessity rather than affection. I think, she said carefully, that she would understand that life requires compromises, that sometimes we must make practical choices to survive. Is that what we are doing? Hunter asked, his gray-green eyes meeting hers across the table. Just surviving. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to explore. Victoria looked away first, standing to clear the dishes, needing something to do with her hands. I should clean up, she said, and Hunter did not push, did not ask her to answer. But the question lingered. November brought the possibility of rain, clouds gathering on the horizon, teasing but not delivering. The desert waited, the plants and animals and people all attuned to the sky, hoping for moisture. The cattle market improved slightly, enough that Hunter made a trip to San Antonio to sell some stock, leaving Victoria alone at the ranch with Hector, his foreman, and the other hands nearby if she needed anything. She found the house unbearably quiet without him, which troubled her. She should have enjoyed the solitude, the complete freedom to structure her days without accommodating anyone else. Instead, she missed him. Missed his presence across from her at dinner, missed the sound of his boots on the porch when he came in from working, missed the way he would read in the evenings, his face relaxed in a way it never was during the day. She missed him, and the realization terrified her. This was not what she had agreed to. She was not supposed to care about Hunter Nash beyond the practical requirements of their arrangement. She was not supposed to listen for his return, to feel her heart lift when she saw his wagon coming up the road after 4 days away, to notice that he looked tired and thinner, to want to fuss over him like a real wife might. Hunter returned from San Antonio with similar confusions. He had hated being away, had conducted his business as quickly as possible and returned faster than was probably wise, pushing the horses harder than he should have. He told himself it was simply because he needed to get back to the ranch, to the work that was always waiting. But he knew, in the honest part of himself he tried to ignore, that he had hurried back to her, that he had missed her, that somewhere in the months of their careful coexistence, she had become essential to him in ways he had not anticipated and did not know how to handle. He had brought her a gift from San Antonio, which was foolish and outside the bounds of their agreement. But he had seen it and thought of her and purchased it, before sense could intervene. It was a book, a new novel by an author she had mentioned enjoying, and he gave it to her awkwardly the evening of his return, thrust at her across the dinner table with words that came out gruff with embarrassment. Saw this in town. Thought you might want it. Victoria had taken the book with hands that trembled slightly, running her fingers over the leather binding, seeing that it was a first edition, expensive, not a casual purchase. Thank you, she said, her voice catching. You did not have to do this. I know, Hunter said. I wanted to. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, some acknowledgement of the shift that had been building for months. Neither knew how to name it, how to address it without risking the fragile balance they had maintained. So they did not try. Victoria thanked him again and turned the conversation to other things, and Hunter allowed it. But they both knew something had changed. December arrived, and with it came preparations for Christmas. Victoria decorated the house modestly, using pine branches brought down from higher elevations and dried chili ristras that added color. She baked, filling the house with scents of cinnamon and vanilla, cookies and sweet breads she shared with Hunter and the ranch hands. Hunter cut a small juniper tree and helped her set it up in the front room, stringing it with paper chains her students had made and candles they lit on Christmas Eve. They exchanged gifts that evening, sitting in the front room with the candlelit tree casting dancing shadows. Victoria gave Hunter a pair of leather gloves she had sewn herself, working on them in the evenings after he had gone to bed. They were lined with soft wool against the cold, with his initials stitched carefully on the cuffs. Hunter gave her a beautiful shawl of fine wool, dyed deep blue, purchased during his trip to San Antonio with her in mind. "This is too much," Victoria said, wrapping the shawl around her shoulders and immediately feeling its warmth. "No," Hunter said quietly. "It is not enough." The words hung between them, meaning more than they seemed to. Victoria looked at him, this man who was her husband in name but had become so much more in her heart, and felt something break inside her, some wall she had built to protect herself. She was falling in love with him, had been for months, denying it with every practical argument she could muster. But sitting there in the candlelight, with his gift warm around her shoulders and his eyes reflecting the gentle flames, she could not deny it any more. "Hunter," she said, using his name deliberately, and watched his eyes change at the sound of it. But whatever she might have said was interrupted by a knock at the door, urgent and loud. Hunter rose quickly, his hand automatically checking the gun he wore even in the house, a habit born from living in wild country. He opened the door to find Hector standing there, his face grim. "Boss, we have trouble. Rustlers hit the south pasture, took maybe 20 head." Hunter swore softly. Rustling was a constant threat, but he had hoped the winter would keep thieves closer to home. "Get the men mounted. I will be right there." He turned to Victoria, apology in his eyes. "I have to go." "I know," she said, understanding even as disappointment washed through her. "Be careful." He paused, looking at her for a long moment, seeming like he wanted to say something. Then he nodded and was gone, grabbing his heavy coat and hat, striding into the night. Victoria stood at the door, watching him disappear into the darkness, the shawl still warm around her shoulders and the words she had almost spoken still caught in her throat. Hunter and his men tracked the rustlers through the night, finding the stolen cattle penned in a box canyon 15 miles from the ranch. The thieves had scattered when the Nash crew arrived, melting into the night rather than face a fight. They recovered the cattle and drove them back, arriving at the ranch as dawn was breaking. Hunter was exhausted, cold despite his heavy coat, and frustrated. Rustling was like trying to hold water in your hands. You could stop one attempt, but there would always be another. Victoria had not slept, had stayed awake listening for his return, and when she heard the commotion of cattle and horses in the pre-dawn darkness, she had rushed to make coffee and heat water for washing. When Hunter came in, dusty and weary, she was waiting with both. "You should have slept," he said, but his voice was soft, touched by her concern. "I could not," Victoria admitted. "Not until I knew you were safe." They looked at each other in the gray light of dawn, and Hunter felt something in his chest expand painfully. She had waited for him. She had worried. These were not the actions of a woman fulfilling the terms of a business arrangement. These were the actions of a woman who cared, and the realization made him reckless. "Victoria," he said, stepping closer, "we should talk about what is happening here." But before she could respond, Hector appeared in the doorway again, apologetic but insistent. There were decisions to be made about the cattle, about increasing patrols, about whether to report the attempted theft to the sheriff in Alpine. The moment dissolved, and Hunter went back to work, leaving Victoria standing in the kitchen with words unspoken once again. The pattern repeated itself through the winter. Moments would arise when they seemed on the verge of acknowledging the feelings growing between them, but always something would intervene. Work, responsibility, the simple demands of living in a harsh place that required constant attention. They circled around each other, drawn together, but held apart by the terms of their original agreement, neither willing to risk destroying the careful balance they had achieved by admitting the truth. Winter gave way to spring, the desert transforming with surprising speed. Rains came in March, gentle soaking rains that brought wildflowers in profusion. The landscape exploded with color, brittlebush blooming bright yellow, prickly pear showing off magenta flowers, bluebonnets carpeting the areas where soil collected. Victoria was enchanted, having never seen the desert in bloom, and Hunter found himself planning excuses to take her riding across the ranch, showing her the places where the flowers grew thickest, watching her face light up with delight. One such afternoon in mid-April, they rode to a spot where a spring fed a small pool, creating a genuine oasis. Cottonwood trees grew around the water, their new leaves bright green against the blue sky. The ground was carpeted with flowers, and Victoria dismounted with a sound of pure joy, moving among the blooms like a child. Hunter watched her, thinking he had never seen anything more beautiful. Her dark hair had come partially loose from its pins, curling around her face. Her cheeks were flushed with the ride and the pleasure of the moment. Her smile was unguarded, genuine, transforming her face from merely pretty to radiant. He felt something tight in his chest, a feeling he had been fighting for months but could not fight anymore. He loved her. The realization was not sudden, not a bolt of lightning. It was more like recognizing something that had been true for a long time, that he had been too stubborn or too afraid to acknowledge. He loved Victoria. He loved her strength and her kindness, her sharp mind and her gentle heart. He loved the way she cared for her students, and the way she hummed while cooking, and the way she read late into the night because she could not put down a good book. He loved her, and the knowledge filled him with equal parts joy and terror. "Hunter, look at this one," Victoria called, kneeling beside a particularly large cluster of flowers. "I have never seen this color blue in nature before." He dismounted and walked to where she knelt, looking at the flowers but seeing mainly her, the wonder in her face. "They only bloom like this once every few years," he said, "when the rains come at the right time." "It is like a miracle," Victoria said softly. Then she looked up at him, and whatever she saw in his face made her breath catch. "Hunter." He could not help himself anymore, could not maintain the careful distance that had defined their relationship. He reached down, helping her to her feet, and when she stood, he did not let go of her hands. "Victoria," he said, her name rough in his throat, "I need to tell you something." "What?" She whispered, her violet eyes wide, something in them that might have been hope or fear or both. "I know we agreed this marriage would be in name only. I know we said this was just a practical arrangement, but I cannot pretend anymore. I cannot keep acting like you are just my business partner when you have become so much more. I love you, Victoria. I think I have loved you for months, and I cannot keep it to myself any longer." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes, relief and joy and fear all mingling together. "Oh, Hunter," she said, her voice breaking. "I love you too. I have been so afraid to say it, so afraid to risk what we have, but I love you. I think I have since Christmas, maybe longer, and it has been torture pretending otherwise." Hunter made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob and pulled her into his arms, holding her close for the first time since their wedding day. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucking under his chin, her arms wrapping around his waist. They stood there among the wildflowers, holding each other like they were drowning and had finally found solid ground. "I want this to be a real marriage," Hunter said into her hair. "I want us to be husband and wife in truth, not just on paper. If you want that too." Victoria pulled back just enough to look up at him, her face wet with tears but smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want that. I want to be your wife in every way." Hunter lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Victoria rose on her toes to meet him. Their lips met, soft at first, tentative, and then deeper as months of suppressed feeling poured out. He tasted like salt and coffee and something indefinably him, and she never wanted to stop kissing him. His arms tightened around her, lifting her slightly, and she made a small sound of happiness against his mouth. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hunter rested his forehead against hers. "We have been fools," he said. "The very worst kind," Victoria agreed, laughing through her tears. "Wasting all these months." "Then we should not waste any more time," Hunter said, and kissed her again, and she poured everything she felt into returning it, all the love and longing and hope for their future. They rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, no longer maintaining the careful distance that had characterized their previous rides. Hunter kept reaching over to touch her hand, her arm, as if reassuring himself she was real, that this was truly happening. Victoria smiled each time, her heart so full she thought it might burst. But the universe, it seemed, was not finished testing them. They returned to find a wagon in the ranch yard, and standing beside it was a woman Hunter clearly recognized, based on the way his expression changed from happiness to something complicated and wary. "Sarah," he said, dismounting and helping Victoria down. "What are you doing here?" The woman was perhaps 30, with blonde hair and pretty features, dressed in traveling clothes that had seen better days. She looked at Hunter with an expression that made Victoria's stomach clench, something possessive and familiar. "Hello, Hunter," the woman said. "I heard about your father passing. I am sorry it took me so long to pay my respects." "Sarah Turner," Hunter said, and Victoria heard the careful neutrality in his voice. "This is my wife, Victoria. Victoria, Sarah is an old friend from years ago." Old friend, Victoria thought, but the way Sarah looked at Hunter suggested she had been more than that. Much more. She felt the happiness of the afternoon curdling into something else, doubt creeping in at the edges. "Your wife," Sarah said, her blue eyes moving to Victoria with an assessment that was anything but friendly. "How surprising. I had heard you married, but I did not quite believe it. You always swore you would never marry, Hunter. Do you remember? After we talked about it, you said you would never tie yourself down that way." Victoria felt like she had been slapped. Hunter saw it in her face and moved closer to her, his hand finding hers. "That was a long time ago, Sarah," he said firmly. "People change. Circumstances change." "Indeed," Sarah said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Well, I do not want to intrude on your hospitality. I am actually on my way to El Paso. My wagon broke an axle about 5 miles back, and your man found me and offered to bring me here to get help with repairs. I will just wait while the repairs are made and then be on my way." "Of course," Hunter said, because what else could he say? "We will get your axle fixed. Hector can handle it." Sarah smiled, and Victoria disliked her intensely in that moment, though she felt small and petty for it. "Thank you, Hunter. You always were kind. It is one of the things I loved most about you." The words were calculated, designed to wound, and they hit their mark. Victoria excused herself, claiming she needed to start dinner, and fled to the house. She heard Hunter call after her but did not stop, needing space to process what had just happened. In the kitchen, she busied herself with preparing food, her hands moving automatically while her mind spun. Hunter had been in love before. Of course he had. He was a grown man, handsome and decent. Why had she assumed she was the first woman to care for him? But the way Sarah had looked at him, the possessive familiarity in her voice, suggested they had been more than just sweethearts. They had clearly been intimate, and the knowledge made Victoria feel sick. Hunter came in a few minutes later, his expression troubled. "Victoria, please let me explain." "You do not owe me an explanation," Victoria said, keeping her voice level with effort. "You had a life before we married. I knew that." "Sarah and I were engaged briefly 8 years ago," Hunter said, clearly deciding full honesty was the only path forward. "We grew up together. Everyone assumed we would marry eventually, but she wanted to leave Texas, wanted to move east, experience life in cities. I could not leave the ranch, especially with my father getting older. We fought about it, broke our engagement. She left, and I had not heard from her in years." "Did you love her?" Victoria asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "I thought I did at the time," Hunter said. "I was 20, and she was the girl I had known my whole life. But it was not real, Victoria, not like what I feel for you. What Sarah and I had was habit and convenience, a match everyone expected. When it came down to it, we did not love each other enough to compromise. We barely knew each other as people, beyond the surface." "She clearly still has feelings for you," Victoria said. "I cannot control what Sarah feels," Hunter replied. "But I can tell you that I do not return those feelings. I have not for many years. You are my wife, Victoria. You are the woman I love. What Sarah and I had is long over." Victoria wanted to believe him. The rational part of her brain knew he was being truthful, that the past was just that. But the insecure part, the part that had been hurt before, that had learned to protect itself, whispered doubts. She had just admitted her feelings for Hunter today. They had just decided to make their marriage real. And immediately, a beautiful woman from his past had appeared, reminding Victoria that she was not the only one who had ever held his heart. "I need time to think," she said, not looking at him. "Please?" Hunter looked like she had struck him, but he nodded. "All right. But Victoria, please believe me. You are the only woman I want, the only one." He left, and Victoria stood alone in the kitchen, feeling tears slide down her cheeks. This morning, everything had seemed perfect. Now, everything felt complicated and uncertain, and she hated it. Sarah's wagon repairs took 2 days. 2 days during which her presence in the ranch cast a shadow over everything. She was charming to the ranch hands, sweet to Hunter, and coolly polite to Victoria in a way that made clear her opinion of Hunter's wife. She made references to shared memories, to inside jokes, to the time when she and Hunter had been young and in love. She was, Victoria realized, trying to make her jealous, trying to create doubt. It was working. Victoria found herself watching Hunter and Sarah together, looking for signs of lingering feeling, torturing herself with comparisons. Sarah was beautiful in a way Victoria was not, delicate and feminine where Victoria was strong and practical. Sarah knew how to flirt, how to make men feel important and desired. Victoria had never learned those skills, had always been too direct, too independent. Hunter tried to reassure her, tried to find moments alone to talk, but the house was small, and Sarah seemed to have an uncanny ability to interrupt whenever they got close to privacy. The night that should have been their first as a truly married couple passed with them in separate rooms, the joy of their declaration in the flower field feeling like a distant memory. On the second evening, Sarah cornered Victoria in the kitchen while Hunter was out checking on the wagon repairs. "You know he does not really love you," Sarah said, her voice gentle, almost kind, which made the words cut deeper. "I am not saying this to be cruel. I am saying it because I think you should know. Hunter married you out of obligation because of his father's will. Everyone in the county knows about it. He needed a wife to inherit the ranch and you needed security. It is a business arrangement, nothing more. You know nothing about our marriage, Victoria said, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. Do I not? Sarah said. I know Hunter better than anyone. I know that he does not believe in romantic love, that he thinks it is foolish and impractical. He told me that when we were together. He said love was not enough, that duty and responsibility mattered more. Do you really think he has changed so much? Why are you doing this? Victoria asked. What do you want? I want Hunter to be happy, Sarah said. And I do not think he can be trapped in a loveless marriage to a woman he barely knows. I made a mistake when I left. I should have stayed, should have fought for us. I am prepared to do that now if he will let me. He is married to me, Victoria said firmly. That is not going to change. Marriages can be dissolved, Sarah said softly. Especially marriages that were never real to begin with. Think about it, Victoria. Would you really want to keep him if his heart is elsewhere? Would you want to spend your life with a man who settled for you because he had no other choice? Sarah left the kitchen, and Victoria sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. The doubts Sarah had planted found fertile ground in Victoria's insecurities. Was Hunter truly in love with her, or had he just convinced himself he was because she was there and convenient? Had their declaration of love been real, or just an emotional moment that did not reflect reality? She thought about the months of their marriage, the careful distance they had maintained, the walls they had built. She thought about how quickly Hunter had agreed to her terms for their arrangement, how he had seemed almost relieved that she was not demanding emotional intimacy. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe Hunter was not capable of the kind of love Victoria needed. Maybe she had fooled herself into thinking he cared. That night when Hunter came to find her, wanting to talk, wanting to finally consummate their marriage now that Sarah would be leaving in the morning, Victoria could not do it. The doubts were too strong, the fear too great. I think we moved too fast, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. I think we got caught up in a moment and said things we did not mean. What? Hunter looked stunned. Victoria, no, I meant every word I said. I love you. Do you? Victoria asked, tears in her eyes. Or do you just love the idea of me, the convenience of a wife who asks for nothing and expects nothing? That is not fair, Hunter said, anger edging into his voice. You know me better than that, or I thought you did. I do not know, Victoria said miserably. I thought I did, but now I am not sure. Sarah said, Hunter interrupted, his voice harsh. Sarah, who you have known for 2 days, who has been doing everything she can to drive a wedge between us. You are going to believe her over me. I do not know what to believe, Victoria said. Everything is happening so fast. Maybe we should slow down, go back to how things were before. Go back, Hunter repeated flatly. You want to go back to pretending we are nothing to each other. I want to be sure, Victoria said. I want to know that what we feel is real. Fine, Hunter said, and his voice was cold now, hurt transmuting into anger. If you need to be sure, if you need to doubt me, then maybe you are right. Maybe we did move too fast. Maybe we do not know each other at all. He left, and Victoria heard his boots heavy on the stairs, heard his door close with finality. She sat in the kitchen and cried, hating herself, hating Sarah, hating the fear that kept her from reaching for what she wanted most. Sarah left the next morning, her wagon repaired, her mission accomplished whether she knew it or not. She said sweet goodbyes to Hunter, smiled at Victoria with something that might have been pity or triumph, and rolled away toward El Paso. Her departure should have brought relief, but instead it left behind wreckage. Hunter and Victoria retreated to the careful formality of their early marriage, But it was different now, worse. Before, the distance had been practical, agreed upon. Now it was born from hurt and doubt, a gulf neither knew how to cross. They barely spoke, communicating only when necessary. Meals were silent affairs. The house felt cold despite the warming spring weather. Victoria threw herself into teaching, staying in town later, finding reasons not to return to the ranch until after dark. Hunter worked from before dawn until exhaustion claimed him, driving himself and his men hard. The ranch hands noticed, exchanging worried looks but saying nothing. This was between the boss and his wife, not their place to interfere. Weeks passed in this miserable state. Victoria felt the wrongness of it constantly, felt the loss of what they had almost had. She knew she had made a mistake, knew she had let fear and insecurity destroy something precious. But pride kept her from admitting it, from apologizing, from trying to fix what she had broken. And Hunter, hurt by her doubt, her willingness to believe a virtual stranger over him, built his walls higher and retreated behind them. It was Hector who finally intervened, unable to watch his boss destroy himself with work and misery. He cornered Hunter in the barn one evening in mid-May when the sun was setting in streaks of orange and red. "Boss, we need to talk," Hector said. "Not now, Hector," Hunter replied, not looking up from the saddle he was cleaning, though it had already been cleaned twice. "Yes, now," Hector said firmly. The foreman was in his 50s, had worked for Thomas Nash and now Hunter for over 30 years. He had earned the right to speak plainly. "You are killing yourself over this thing with your wife, and it is foolishness." "You do not know what you are talking about," Hunter said, his jaw tight. "I know you love her," Hector said. "I have watched you fall for her over these months, seen you happier than I have ever seen you. And then that Turner woman shows up and poisons everything, and instead of fighting for your marriage, you just let it die." "She does not trust me," Hunter said, the words bursting out of him. "She believed Sarah's lies over my truth. What kind of marriage can we have without trust?" "The kind you build," Hector said. "You think trust just appears. You think love is easy. It is work, boss. Hard work. Harder than anything you do on this ranch, but it is worth it. Your mother, God rest her, she did not trust your father when they first married. He was a hard man and she was a gentle woman. But they built something good because they kept trying. They kept fighting for it." Hunter was quiet, Hector's words settling over him. He thought about his parents, about the partnership they had forged in this harsh place. He thought about what Victoria had said in the flower field, that she loved him. Could he really believe that was a lie, a moment of weakness she regretted? Or was she just afraid, scared by Sarah's appearance, by the vulnerability that came with opening your heart? "What do I do?" Hunter asked, feeling helpless in a way he never did when facing the practical problems of ranching. "You fight," Hector said simply. "You show her that your love is real. You do not give up." Meanwhile, in town, Victoria was receiving similar advice from Mrs. Chen. The older woman had noticed Victoria's unhappiness, the shadows under her eyes, the way her smiles no longer reached her face. "What troubles you, child?" Mrs. Chen asked one afternoon when Victoria came to collect the lunch the restaurant had prepared for her students. Victoria had not meant to confide in anyone, but Mrs. Chen's kind eyes and patient silence broke through her defenses. The whole story poured out, the loveless marriage that had become love, Sarah's appearance and poisonous words, Victoria's doubt and Hunter's hurt, the miserable weeks since. Mrs. Chen listened without interruption, and when Victoria finally fell silent, she was quiet for a long moment, considering. "My husband," Mrs. Chen finally said. "He was a good man, but he was proud. When we first married, we fought often. One time we did not speak for a month, both too stubborn to admit wrong. Then one day he coughed up blood in the mine. Mercury poisoning. The doctor said he had maybe a year, and I thought about all the time we had wasted, all the days spent in silence because of pride. We did not have enough time together, even loving each other every moment of that last year. But if we had continued in stubbornness, we would have lost even that. I am afraid, Victoria admitted. What if Hunter does not really love me? What if I open my heart completely and he breaks it? What if he does love you, Mrs. Cheng countered, and you lose him because of fear? What is worse, being hurt by love or never having love at all? Victoria had no answer, but the question haunted her. She thought about it as she taught her students, as she rode back to the ranch in the evening, as she lay in her bed at night. What was worse? She had spent so much energy protecting herself, building walls to keep hurt out. But those same walls kept love out too. And now, when she had found someone worth loving, someone who might actually love her in return, she was letting fear destroy it. The realization crystallized one evening in late May as she sat in her room, alone as always. She loved Hunter. That was the simple truth underneath all the fear and doubt. She loved him, and she had hurt him, and she needed to fix it. She needed to fight for their marriage, to prove that her love was real and her trust could be rebuilt. She needed to be brave. Victoria stood and walked down the hall to Hunter's room, her heart pounding. She knocked softly, and after a moment he opened the door. He looked tired, she realized, as tired as she felt, dark circles under his eyes, his face drawn. "Victoria," he said, surprise clear in his voice. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Please." He hesitated, and she saw the wariness in his eyes, the protective walls he had built. But he nodded and stepped aside, letting her into his room. It was sparse, practical, nothing decorative except a single photograph of his parents on the dresser. They sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to touch, and the awkwardness of the moment almost made Victoria lose her courage. "I am sorry," she said, forcing the words out before fear could stop her. "I am so sorry, Hunter. I should have trusted you. I should have believed you over Sarah. But I was scared. I have been hurt before by people I thought loved me, and when Sarah appeared and said those things, it played into every fear I have. I let that fear make me doubt you, and I hurt you, and I am sorrier than I can say." Hunter was quiet for a moment, and Victoria held her breath, waiting. "Why now?" he finally asked. "What changed?" "I realized that being afraid of getting hurt was hurting me more than any actual heartbreak could," Victoria said. "These past weeks without you, with this distance between us, have been the worst of my life. Worse than when my mother died, worse than when my father drank himself to death, worse than anything. And I realized that I would rather risk you breaking my heart than live like this without you." "I would never break your heart intentionally," Hunter said, his voice rough. "I love you, Victoria. I told you that truth in the flower field, and it is still true now. It will always be true." "I know," Victoria said, and she realized she did know, had known it all along beneath the fear. "I love you too. I never stopped, even when I was doubting. I love you, and I want our marriage to be real. I want to be your wife in every way." Hunter reached for her then, pulling her into his arms, holding her close like he had in the flower field, and Victoria felt the tightness in her chest ease. This was right. This was where she belonged. "No more separate rooms," Hunter said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "No more pretending. We are married, Victoria, really married. I want to build a life with you, a real partnership." "Yes," Victoria said. "Yes, I want that too." He kissed her then, and it was different from the kisses in the flower field, deeper, more certain, flavored with relief and love and the promise of what was to come. Victoria kissed him back with everything in her, pouring months of longing and love into it. They made love that night, slowly and tenderly, learning each other without the barriers that had always stood between them. Hunter was gentle, patient with Victoria's inexperience, making sure she felt only pleasure. Victoria gave herself to him completely, without reservation, trusting him with her body and her heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, talking in quiet voices, making plans for their future, rebuilding what had almost been destroyed. "We will have to redecorate," Hunter said, running his hand through her loose hair, marveling at the feel of it. "Turn your old room into something else, maybe a nursery eventually." "Eventually," Victoria agreed, smiling against his chest. "But not too soon. I want you to myself for a while first." "That can be arranged," Hunter said, kissing the top of her head. "Though I have to warn you, I plan to spend a lot of time making up for the months we wasted." "I accept those terms," Victoria said, tilting her face up to kiss him again. They slept that night in each other's arms, and when Victoria woke to the sun streaming through the window, she felt happier than she had in months. Hunter was still sleeping, his face peaceful in repose, and she took a moment to simply look at him, to appreciate that he was hers and she was his, that they had found their way through the obstacles to this moment. The months that followed were the happiest of Victoria's life. Their marriage, now real in every sense, deepened daily. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs and fears and hopes. Hunter made an effort to finish work earlier, to spend evenings with Victoria. She made an effort to let him in, to share her thoughts and feelings, to trust him with her vulnerabilities. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, building the foundation of real partnership. Victoria continued teaching, but now she returned home eager to see her husband rather than dreading the empty silence. Hunter helped her with lesson planning sometimes, offering the perspective of someone who had learned to read from his mother, suggesting ways to reach students who struggled. They made the house truly a home, adding touches that reflected both of them, mixing her love of books with his practical needs, creating a space that felt lived in and loved. In July, when the heat became oppressive again, Hunter insisted Victoria take a break from teaching through the worst of it, and she agreed without argument, having learned that accepting care from someone who loved her was not weakness but wisdom. They spent long, lazy afternoons in the shade of the porch, reading together, talking, simply being together. Some days, they rode out across the ranch, Hunter showing her every corner of the land, and she fell in love with it as she had fallen in love with him, seeing the harsh beauty through his eyes. The ranch hands noticed the change, the happiness that now infused the main house, and they smiled among themselves. Hector took quiet satisfaction in his boss's joy, feeling he had played a small part in bringing it about. The ranch thrived under Hunter's renewed energy and focus, no longer just work to distract him from loneliness but something to build for the future, for the family he hoped to have with Victoria. Late that summer, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Hunter one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the sky painted in impossible colors, and he had swept her into his arms with a joy so pure it brought tears to both their eyes. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "A baby, Victoria. In March, the doctor thinks," Victoria said, smiling through happy tears. "Spring." Hunter placed his hand on her stomach, still flat but carrying the promise of their child, and felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him. "I am going to be a father," he said, wonder in his voice. "I am going to do better than my father did. I am going to show our child they are loved every single day." "I know you will," Victoria said. "You are going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and Victoria taught through the fall and into early winter before the other teachers in town insisted she rest. Hunter was attentive to the point of being overprotective. worrying about her constantly until she had to laugh and reassure him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. But she loved his concern, loved the way he would rest his hand on her growing stomach and talk to the baby, telling their child about the ranch, about the horses, about the life they would have. She loved the way he looked at her, with such tenderness and desire, making her feel beautiful even as her body changed in ways that sometimes made her feel awkward and ungainly. Winter came, and with it, preparations for the baby. They converted Victoria's old room into a nursery, painting it a cheerful yellow that would work for a boy or girl. Victoria sewed blankets and tiny clothes with help from Mrs. Chen and other women in town. Hunter built a cradle from wood, carving it carefully, making sure there were no rough edges that could hurt delicate skin. As March approached, both excitement and nervousness grew. Hunter worried constantly about Victoria, about the dangers of childbirth in a place where the nearest real doctor was in Alpine, over 60 miles away. Victoria worried about being a good mother, about whether she would know what to do, how to keep their baby safe and happy. The night Victoria went into labor, a storm rolled in from the west, unusual for March but not unheard of. The sky opened up, dumping rain on the parched desert, and the sound of it on the roof was deafening. Hunter rode through the downpour to fetch Mrs. Chen, who had experience as a midwife, and the older woman came without hesitation, bringing her supplies and her calm competence. Labor was long and difficult, as first births often are. Victoria labored through the night and into the next day, and the sound of rain continued, relentless, transforming the desert into something green and alive. Hunter stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, talking to her through the pain. Mrs. Chen directed him, showing him how to support Victoria, how to help, and he did everything asked of him without hesitation. "You are doing so well," he told Victoria during a brief respite between contractions. "You are so strong. I love you so much." "Love you too," Victoria gasped, gripping his hand as another contraction built. "Do not leave." "Never," Hunter promised. "I am right here, always." Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, painting the rain-washed sky in gold and pink, their son was born. Mrs. Chen placed the baby in Victoria's arms, and both parents looked down at the tiny, perfect human they had created with tears streaming down their faces. "He is beautiful," Victoria whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand, marveling as he gripped her finger with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Hunter agreed, his voice choked with emotion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but had not decided definitively, wanting to see the baby before choosing. Now, looking at their son, Victoria knew. "Henry," she said. "After your mother Helen, but the masculine version. Henry Thomas Nash, after both your parents." Hunter kissed her forehead, unable to speak for a moment. "That is perfect," he finally managed. "Henry. Our son Henry." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting in ways neither had anticipated. Henry was healthy but demanding, needing to be fed frequently, crying for reasons they could not always decipher. Victoria struggled with the constant needs, the way her body ached from childbirth, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this tiny human alive. Hunter helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Henry when the baby was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, bringing Victoria food and water and making sure she rested when possible. They learned together, figuring out Henry's patterns, understanding his different cries, marveling at every tiny milestone. His first smile, which came at 6 weeks, made them both weep with joy. His first laugh, a burbling sound of delight when Hunter made funny faces, became something they would do anything to hear again. Victoria went back to teaching part-time when Henry was 3 months old, bringing him with her to the schoolhouse. Her students were enchanted, learning responsibility by helping care for the baby, and Victoria found joy in showing Henry the world of learning she loved. Hunter would sometimes ride into town during the day to check on them, and the sight of him dismounting and walking into the schoolhouse would make her heart lift every time still, after everything they had been through. By Henry's first birthday, they had settled into a rhythm as a family. The ranch continued to prosper, Hunter's hard work and smart decisions paying off. Victoria balanced teaching with motherhood, finding fulfillment in both. Their love, tested by doubt and nearly destroyed by fear, had emerged stronger, deepened by the life they had built together. One evening in April, after Henry was asleep in his crib, Victoria and Hunter sat on the porch in the cool evening air. The desert had bloomed again after spring rains, and the air smelled green and alive. "Do you remember," Victoria said, leaning against Hunter's shoulder, "when we married and agreed it would be loveless, when we promised to stay out of each other's way?" Hunter laughed softly. "I remember thinking I could keep that promise. I was very wrong." "I was wrong too," Victoria said. "I thought I could protect myself by not feeling anything. But you cannot protect yourself from love. It finds you anyway if you are lucky." "I am the lucky one," Hunter said, kissing her temple. "I married a stranger thinking it was obligation and found the love of my life instead." "That night in the rain," Victoria said, "when Henry was born. When you stayed with me through all of it, when I saw how much you loved us. That was when I knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where I was meant to be, not despite the hardship, but because of it. We built something real, Hunter, something that will last." "Forever," Hunter agreed. "We built forever." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, both thinking about the journey that had brought them here. A business arrangement born of necessity had transformed into genuine love, had survived doubt and fear and hurt, and had given them more than either had dreamed possible. Years passed, each one adding depth to their story. 2 more children joined their family. A daughter they named Helen after Hunter's mother, who had Victoria's violet eyes and her father's quiet determination. And another son, James, who was adventurous and bold from the moment he could walk. The house that had once echoed with loneliness filled with noise and laughter and life. Henry grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did, spending every moment he could with Hunter, learning the work. Helen was clever and bookish like her mother, devouring every book in the house and begging for more. James was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with a heart so loving he could charm his way out of most trouble. Victoria continued teaching for several years before the demands of 3 children, and the ranch required her full attention at home. She did not regret the choice, finding as much fulfillment in raising her children and supporting Hunter as she had in the schoolhouse. She tutored her own children and several others from neighboring ranches, ensuring education remained central to their lives. Hunter expanded the ranch gradually, buying adjacent properties as they became available, building something that would provide for his family for generations. He treated his workers fairly, earning loyalty and respect. The Nash Ranch became known not just for the quality of its cattle and horses, but for the integrity of its operation. They grew older together, their love deepening with every year, every challenge faced and overcome together. They argued sometimes, about money or child rearing or the 1,000 small decisions that make up a life, but they always talked it through, always came back to the foundation of respect and love they had built. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children now grown or nearly so, Hunter and Victoria returned to the spring where he had first told her he loved her. It was April again, and the desert was blooming just as it had that day, carpeted in wildflowers that defied the harsh environment to display their beauty. 25 years, Victoria said, her hand in Hunter's as they walked among the flowers. Her hair was streaked with gray now, and lines creased her face, but Hunter thought she had never been more beautiful. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. Both, Hunter said, both are true. He was graying too, his face weathered by decades in the sun, his hands scarred from work, but his eyes still held the same love when he looked at her. If we could go back, Victoria said, and tell our younger selves what was coming, what would you say? Hunter considered. I would tell myself to be brave sooner, to not waste those early months pretending I did not feel what I felt, to trust that love was worth the risk. I would tell myself the same, Victoria agreed. That fear is not protection, it is prison. And that real love, the kind that lasts, is not something that happens to you. It is something you build day by day, choice by choice. We built something good, Hunter said, pulling her close. Something real and lasting. We did, Victoria agreed. From a loveless arrangement to the greatest love of my life. I would not change a single moment, because they all led us here. They kissed there among the wildflowers. Two people who had promised each other nothing and given each other everything, who had started as strangers bound by law and become partners bound by love. The desert bloomed around them, temporary and glorious, but what they had built together would endure beyond seasons, beyond years, beyond life itself. They had built forever, and forever was exactly what they got. The Nash ranch continued to thrive under their stewardship, passed eventually to Henry, who ran it with the same integrity his father had shown. Helen became a teacher like her mother, opening a school that served the entire county. James became a horse trainer, his talent for working with difficult animals earning him a reputation that brought buyers from across Texas. Hunter and Victoria lived to see their grandchildren, delighting in each new addition to the family they had created. They told the grandchildren stories of the old days, of the wild desert and the hard work that had built everything they knew. They told them about the importance of education and integrity, about treating people with respect, about the value of hard work. But mostly, they told them about love. About how real love was not easy or simple, but complicated and challenging and worth every moment. About how love was not something you found, but something you built with patience and courage and daily choice. About how the best things in life often came from the most unlikely places, if you were brave enough to reach for them. As they grew old together, Hunter and Victoria spent their evenings on the porch they had sat on for decades, watching the desert sunsets that never ceased to amaze them, holding hands like young lovers, grateful for every moment they had been given. Hunter died first, at 78, peacefully in his sleep with Victoria beside him. His last words to her were the same as his first real words to her, spoken in a field of wildflowers decades before. I love you. Victoria lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, content in her memories and secure in the knowledge that she had been truly, deeply loved. When her time came, she went peacefully, and they buried her beside Hunter in the small cemetery on the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. The stone they shared was simple, bearing just their names and dates and a single line that said everything that mattered, from arrangement to forever. The story of Hunter and Victoria Nash became legend in Terlingua, told and retold through generations. The story of two people who agreed to a loveless marriage and found instead the greatest love either had known. The story of one rainy night when a child was born, and pretending became impossible for both. The story of how love, real and lasting, is built from choice and courage and the daily decision to keep trying, keep reaching, keep believing. Their descendants still run the Nash Ranch, still honor the values Hunter and Victoria instilled, still tell the story to each new generation. And sometimes, in April when the desert blooms, family members visit that spring where Hunter first confessed his love, where wildflowers still carpet the ground in impossible colors, and they remember that the best things in life are worth the risk, worth the fear, worth the leap into the unknown. Because Hunter and Victoria took that leap, and it carried them through 50 years of joy and sorrow, challenge and triumph, and most importantly, love that transformed them both from lonely individuals into a family, a legacy, a love story that would endure as long as the desert itself, as long as memories last, as long as people still believe that love, real love, is worth everything.